In controlled deception studies conducted across multiple forensic laboratories, researchers repeatedly observed a consistent anomaly. When individuals lie under pressure, the spoken statement often remains stable. The body posture may also appear controlled, yet the face behaves differently, not dramatically, not in an obvious way, but in micro intervals too fast for conscious correction. One of the earliest systematic recordings came from high-speed facial analysis experiments, where participants were instructed to deny emotionally charged events they had personally experienced. The surprising result was not the voice. It was not the words. It was the fraction of a second mismatch between intention and expression. The question that emerged was not whether people lie well. It was something more precise. Why does the human face sometimes reveal intent before the brain has fully committed to the lie? This phenomenon is studied under affect leakage and microexpression theory, a branch of behavioral psychology developed significantly through the work of Paul Ekman. The core idea is not that people look guilty. It is that emotional activation precedes voluntary expression control by a measurable neurological delay. The brain does not generate deception as a single unified action. It splits into competing systems, one generating emotional truth responses, another constructing socially acceptable output. The conflict between these systems creates brief, involuntary facial activity. Daniel Kahneman's model of System 1 and System 2 cognition helps clarify this. System 1 reacts instantly, emotionally, and automatically. System 2 constructs deliberate control. The face often reflects System 1 before System 2 fully engages. By the end of this breakdown, the viewer will be able to recognize how deception is not detected through words alone, but through timing inconsistencies between emotional impulse and controlled expression. Across observational studies of high-stakes interviews, a consistent pattern appears. The moment a person is asked a direct question involving guilt, responsibility, or concealed information, there is a delay gap of roughly 200–500 milliseconds before verbal response stabilizes. Within that gap, facial muscles often activate involuntarily. Not fully formed expressions, only fragments, tightening around the eyes, slight compression of the lips, or asymmetrical tension. The critical insight is that deception is not a state, it is a transition, and transitions are where control fails. In practical observation, this means you do not evaluate what a person says first, you evaluate what happens immediately before they begin to say it. A useful detection rule: watch the face at the exact moment the question ends, not when the answer begins. This baseline instability leads into the next layer. What happens when the brain attempts to overwrite this leakage in real time? When individuals become aware of being evaluated, a second mechanism activates: expressive masking. This is the conscious attempt to normalize facial output. However, masking does not eliminate leakage, it delays it, and delay creates distortion. In controlled experiments, participants instructed to appear honest while lying produced more rigid facial expressions than untrained liars. The face becomes over-controlled, producing what researchers describe as expression flattening. Over-control is often more diagnostically useful than lack of control, because natural behavior is fluid. Deception is mechanical. Detection method: look for faces that appear too stable during emotionally loaded questions. Stability under pressure is not neutrality, it is compensation. This leads directly into a deeper inconsistency: emotional timing mismatch. Under normal conditions, emotional response and facial expression are synchronized. In deception, this synchronization breaks. A statement may be delivered with confidence, but the emotional response tied to the content appears either slightly earlier or slightly later in facial activity. This creates what forensic analysts call temporal misalignment. In practical terms, the face may show discomfort before the denial is spoken, or relief after the denial is completed. Truth and lie are not distinguished by content. They are distinguished by timing architecture. Detection tool: do not isolate expressions. Compare them against speech boundaries. Emotional activity that does not align with linguistic structure, is often the most reliable indicator of internal conflict. But even this is not absolute because the brain can adapt. And this is where the system becomes more complex. But here is where it becomes more complex. Not all microexpressions indicate deception. In some cases, they indicate emotional recall rather than fabrication. A person reliving a memory may show identical facial leakage patterns to someone inventing one. This creates a critical error in amateur interpretation, confusing emotional activation with dishonesty. The brain does not differentiate cleanly between imagined, remembered, and constructed emotional experiences. The amygdala responds to emotional intensity, not truth value, so the presence of leakage alone is not evidence of lying, it is evidence of internal emotional conflict. The source of that conflict must still be determined. This is where most casual interpretations fail. They stop at detection instead of analysis, and this leads into the deeper implication, what this system reveals about human behavior itself. If the human face can produce involuntary emotional signals faster than conscious control, then social interaction is never fully controlled. Every conversation contains micro-level inconsistencies between what is felt and what is expressed. Most of these inconsistencies go unnoticed, not because they are absent, but because the human perceptual system is not calibrated to process them in real time. This means deception is not an exception in human interaction. It is a constant background possibility, not always intentional, not always malicious, but structurally embedded in how cognition operates. The unsettling realization is not that people lie, it is that the boundary between truth and constructed expression is neurologically thin enough to fail under minimal pressure. And if that is true, then every individual is not only capable of deception, they are already producing partial signals of it without awareness. Now that the mechanism is clear, observation becomes structured rather than intuitive. First tool, isolate timing, not expression. Watch the milliseconds between question completion and response initiation. Emotional leakage appears here most consistently. Second tool, identify over-control. Faces that appear unusually stable under emotional pressure are often compensating for internal activation. Stability is not absence, it is regulation effort. Third tool, separate content from physiology. Words can be rehearsed indefinitely. Physiological timing cannot be fully rehearsed under spontaneous pressure. The most reliable signal in human behavior is not what is shown, it is what escapes alignment. The face does not lie more than the person, it simply reacts faster than intention can organize itself. And once you understand that sequence, every conversation becomes something different. Not a performance of honesty or deception, but a continuous negotiation between impulse and control. Next, the analysis moves deeper into how voice patterns betray cognitive load even when the face is perfectly controlled.